Hello, judges. My name is Tony Auger. I'm the Chief Coffee Officer over at Goshen Coffee. And today I'm going to walk you through my roast plan for this coffee from the Shirley Cooperative in Rwanda. So the first thing I wanted to do was take this coffee through my standard sample process. That would include doing a green grading on this coffee. After the green grading, I threw in 50 grams into my Ikawa sample roaster. And I used a base East African profile that I've created. I found that over the years, this 8-minute roast with a really steady ROR gives me a baseline to know how I want to change this coffee. So at first, I saw a lot of potential in the coffee, but one thing I really didn't like about it was I was getting a lot of baking spice notes. And I really knew I could improve the acidity, quality, and overall sweetness on this coffee. So my plan was to experiment with the drying phase length, also the heat during Maillard. I wanted to see just how short I could get my DTR to be. And lastly, I knew I wanted to decrease the final drop temperature. So here you can see all my experiments compared to my base profile in orange. What I quickly noticed was that my low and slow drying roasts were absolutely my favorite. I also noticed that when this was around 53% of my roast, it really made the coffee shine in a great way. I also noticed that when I shortened my my DTR under 10%, I would get vegetal flavors at that point. And so I really wanted to make sure I stayed at 10%. And I knew I was going to have a little bit more of a gentle DTR phase. And lastly, I also noticed that hotter Maillard reaction gave me much more fruit flavors that were like clementine and nectarine. So I would stick with about 37% of a hot Maillard reaction. And I knew my final bean temp was going to be like 407. So this is a comparison between my previous two favorite roasts. And in pink is the new profile that I created. I hit everything on the exact numbers that I wanted to hit. And I thought this coffee was great the way it was, but there were some variables in my green grading process that I have not yet discussed, which would make me have to continue roasting on the Ikawa. So during the green grading, I put the coffee under a UV light. And what I noticed was there's a significant amount of microbial growth that looks like speckling on the coffee. You can kind of see that around here. So speckling happens when you have poor water quality at origin when the coffee is being washed. This kind of can result in like some baking spice note flavors that I was getting. Also, it can come off as woody over time. So about 4.6% of that roast was speckled, so I removed that and got a much more structured and clean cup. Second was that I noticed the screen size was really inconsistent. So I had about 47% 17-18, about 45% 15-16, and 8% 13-14. And each one of these coffees, when I roasted it at my new profile, really had some positive and negatives. So I knew that my next step was I was going to have to keep these coffees separate and give them their own slightly altered profile. So the 17-18 really showed off the sweetness. And in order to even amplify that more, I wanted to stretch out my Maillard and also stretched out my DTR, and that would make sure that I was caramelizing the sugar in those larger beans. Next was my acidity. So my 15-16 profile really showcased that acidity well. In order to make it pop even more, I wanted to shorten my Maillard. And then I even gave it a little bit more than 10% of a DTR because I noticed that when I didn't do this, there were some really harsh tannins. And then lastly, my 13-14 profile, that was going to be my flavor and body because this was almost entirely pea berries. In order to roast a coffee like this, you're going to have to start with a really hot temperature charge and then keep it hot during the drying phase in order to permeate the entire seed. So my final roast blend was I did 50% of the 15-16 and then equal parts of the 13-14 and 17-18. And I ended up getting a fragrance and aroma of brown sugar, candied orange, and tea rose. My flavors were tart plum, ripe apricot, and subtle florals as it cooled. My aftertaste was black tannins and Cabernet Sauvignon, so tannins but not overpowering. My acidity was citric and like drinking limeade. My body was juicy and mouth-watering. And finally, my sweetness was deep, dark fruits, and raw sugar. Time.